A young millionaire married me to avoid an arranged marriage. My true identity shocked him. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
I never imagined my life would turn out like this. I was just a regular girl from a small town, living quietly, dreaming quietly, always careful not to rock the boat. People often told me that my life was simple, uneventful, maybe even boring, but I liked it that way. I liked the quiet, the predictability, the sense that I could plan my days without everything exploding around me. But then, everything changed in a way I could never have predicted. That it started the night I received the first letter, a golden envelope, delicate, sealed with a wax emblem I didn't recognize. I remember staring at it, unsure whether to touch it, my fingers trembling, because the handwriting on the envelope was elegant and unfamiliar, almost too perfect. My heart raced, even though I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was probably just some mistake or maybe a formal invitation to something unimportant. But deep down, I had this feeling, a small, insistent warning, whispering in the back of my mind, something is coming, Alec, something that will change everything. When I opened the envelope, my world tilted. The letter inside wasn't long, but every word felt heavy, like a stone pressing on my chest. It said, in the kind of language that makes you want to laugh at how proper it sounds, that I had been noticed, that someone important, someone unimaginably wealthy and powerful, had taken an interest in me. I should have been thrilled. Instead, I felt a chill creep over me, a shiver that started at my toes and crawled all the way up to my head. I couldn't breathe properly, my pulse thrumming in my ears. Who could it be? Why me? I barely had money to keep myself afloat, working long hours at a tiny cafe, surviving paycheck to paycheck. I wasn't anyone's idea of remarkable, and yet, here was this person, someone from a life I couldn't even imagine, wanting to involve me in theirs. Days passed in a blur after that. I kept replaying the letter in my mind, reading and rereading it, trying to make sense of it. Then, out of nowhere, he appeared. His presence was sudden, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. I first saw him at the cafe, leaning against the counter, his expensive shoes tapping lightly against the tile floor. He smiled at me, but it wasn't the kind of smile that makes you feel safe. It was the kind that makes you aware you're being measured, analyzed. I wanted to step back, to disappear behind the counter, and pretend I didn't exist, but I couldn't. My legs didn't move, my chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my curiosity held me in place. He introduced himself casually, but even in his casual words, there was power, confidence, a wealth I couldn't even comprehend. And the more he spoke, the more I realized that this wasn't just about curiosity or chance, it was about control. He wanted something from me, and I couldn't figure out what. I kept my distance, tried to remain polite, professional even, but inside I was screaming, every fiber of my body warning me to be careful. Then the proposal came. I can still remember the exact words, the way he said them, like a man used to giving commands rather than asking questions. He said he wanted to marry me. My hands froze, the cup I was holding slipping slightly before I caught it. What? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. I thought I had misheard. Surely, this was a mistake. Surely, there was some hidden meaning behind this, some trick. But no, he was serious. A marriage proposal. Not a joke, not a test. A real, binding promise that would change everything about my life, whether I wanted it to or not. My mind spun. I thought about my family, about my life back home, about the tiny apartment I rented and the long hours I spent just trying to survive. How could I possibly step into a world so far removed from anything I had ever known? And yet, the idea that I might be able to avoid a fate I had been dreading, a life arranged for me by people I barely knew, decisions made for me rather than by me, stirred something dangerous inside me, something rebellious, something that whispered, maybe this is your escape, maybe this is your chance to control your own life. It wasn't easy. I didn't say yes immediately. I couldn't. I had to weigh every possible outcome, every risk, every lie I might have to live with, every secret I would need to keep. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that if I refused, my life might continue the way it had been, predictable, safe, but confined, trapped. And even though the alternative terrified me, a part of me, small, stubborn, desperate, wanted to take the chance. So I said yes, and immediately, I knew there was no turning back. The days that followed were surreal. My world shifted overnight. I left my tiny apartment and stepped into a mansion that seemed to float above the city. A place so vast and immaculate it felt unreal. I was surrounded by servants, security, and people who watched my every move with curiosity, suspicion, or something I couldn't name. I was invisible, yet constantly observed, scrutinized, measured. I had escaped one kind of control only to enter another. And then, the first night we spent together as a married couple, I realized I was far from prepared for what lay ahead. I had agreed to this union thinking I understood my position, my role, my purpose, but I hadn't. There were secrets, layers I could not yet see. And the moment I discovered them, everything changed again, twisting into something I had not anticipated, something shocking, something that would test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine. I wish I could say that I was brave. I wasn't. I wish I could say that I understood what was happening. I didn't. I was just a girl caught in a world I had glimpsed in magazines but never truly known. A world of wealth, expectations, and hidden truths. I had stepped into it willingly, but that didn't make it easier. Every step I took felt like walking a tightrope. Every smile I forced was a mask. And every word I spoke was a careful negotiation. And then it happened. The moment that would haunt me forever. The moment when the truth hit me like a thunderclap. When I realized that nothing in this world was as it seemed, and that even the person I thought I trusted, maybe even myself, could not predict what came next. I froze, unable to move, unable to speak, my mind racing 1,000 miles an hour. And as I looked into his eyes, expecting shock or anger, I saw something entirely different, a mixture of disbelief and fear that mirrored my own. I can't tell you yet what that secret was, what changed everything, because the story is not over. And if I told you now, it wouldn't have the same weight, the same sting, the same emotional gravity that hit me in that moment. All I can say is that my life, my reality, my very understanding of who I am, was shattered and remade in a single instant. And it is in that moment, right at the edge of understanding and chaos, that my story truly begins. I remember standing there, frozen, heart hammering, unable to fully comprehend what I had just discovered. It was like the floor beneath me had vanished, and I was falling into a space that was both terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear, but my legs refused to obey. Every instinct screamed at me to escape, yet my curiosity, the part of me that had taken this impossible leap in the first place, held me rooted to the spot. He was staring at me, wide-eyed, the same mixture of shock and awe mirrored in his gaze. I had never seen a look like that on anyone's face before. It was as if time had slowed, the world narrowing down to just the two of us, the air thick with tension and disbelief. And in that suspended moment, I realized that whatever I thought I knew about him, about our arrangement, about this entire life I had stepped into, was nothing but a fragile illusion. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal, to pretend that nothing had happened. I went through the motions of being a wife, attending dinners, sitting through endless conversations with people I barely knew, all while carrying a secret so heavy it felt like it might crush me. Every smile I forced was a mask. Every laugh was a carefully measured sound designed to hide the storm inside me. I felt like a performer in a play where the stakes were far higher than I could ever imagine. But the secret didn't stay hidden for long. Small cracks began to appear, moments when his expression flickered, revealing the vulnerability and fear he usually kept buried beneath his confident exterior. I noticed the way he avoided certain rooms in the mansion, the way he hesitated before answering some questions, the tiny, almost imperceptible sighs that betrayed his tension. It became clear that he was as trapped by this revelation as I was, and the more I saw, the more I realized that what we had entered together wasn't just a marriage, it was a delicate, dangerous dance on the edge of truth and deception. One evening, I found myself alone in the grand library, the soft glow of the chandeliers reflecting off the polished floor. I sank into a chair, hands trembling, trying to gather my thoughts. The enormity of everything pressed down on me like a physical weight. How had my life taken such an impossible turn? How had a girl from a small town, living quietly and cautiously, ended up in a world of secrets, wealth, and hidden truths that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction? I felt both terrified and alive in a way I had never felt before, my mind racing through every possibility, every danger, every decision I had made that had brought me here. And then, the unexpected happened. A letter slid under the library door, unsigned, with a message so simple, yet so shattering, that it made my stomach drop. It said, "You know more than you should. Be careful. Everything is not what it seems." Just those 8 words, written in the smallest, neatest handwriting, sent a chill through me that I could not shake. Who had sent it? How did they know? And what did it mean for my life? For the fragile trust I had begun to build? For the secrets I was still too afraid to confront? I spent that night pacing, unable to sleep, my mind cycling through every encounter, every whispered conversation, every glance that had seemed insignificant before. Was someone watching me? Did someone know the truth about me? About him? About us? I felt the walls of the mansion closing in, the golden halls and polished floors suddenly suffocating. The safety I thought I had found here was an illusion, fragile and easily shattered. And somewhere deep inside, a part of me realized that nothing in this gilded, opulent world would ever be the same again. The following days were a careful balancing act. I learned to read his expressions more closely, to anticipate his reactions, to navigate the invisible web of tension that surrounded us. Every conversation became a test, every smile a calculated risk, and yet, amid the fear and uncertainty, there was a thrill, a dangerous, intoxicating sense that I was living a life far beyond anything I could have imagined. The ordinary girl I had once been was disappearing, replaced by someone sharper, braver, and infinitely more aware of the fragile boundaries between truth and deception. Then came the night, when everything almost fell apart. A guest arrived, unexpectedly, someone who had known him long before I had entered his life. Their arrival sent ripples through the household, and I could feel the tension thickening with every step they took. Conversations were clipped, smiles forced, and the air itself seemed charged with anticipation. And in that moment, I realized just how precarious my position truly was. One wrong word, one slip of the tongue, and all the fragile trust I had managed to build could vanish in an instant. As the evening progressed, I watched as subtle confrontations unfolded, the kind of silent battles that no one else in the room could fully understand. I realized that I was no longer merely a participant in someone else's story. I was an active player, a person whose choices could alter the course of events in ways both terrifying and profound. And with that realization came an understanding of responsibility for myself, for the truth, for the fragile equilibrium that held our lives together. By the time the night ended, I was exhausted yet more alert than ever. I knew that the days ahead would test me in ways I had not yet imagined, that secrets would be revealed, alliances questioned, and loyalties tested. And despite the fear that gnawed at my insides, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. I had stepped into this world willingly, with my eyes wide open, and I was beginning to understand that survival here required more than caution. It required courage, cunning, and an unflinching willingness to face whatever truths might come. And as I lay awake that night, staring at the ornate ceiling, I asked myself a question I knew would haunt me for a long time. How far could I go before I became someone I didn't recognize? Before the secrets and revelations swallowed the girl I once was? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew one thing for certain. My life had changed forever, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. The days that followed were a whirlwind I could never have prepared for. I began to notice patterns, small things at first: how the staff whispered when they thought I wasn't listening, the way certain doors were always locked, and how he sometimes disappeared without a word, only to return with an expression I couldn't read. My curiosity was gnawing at me, urging me to uncover the secrets hidden behind the polished walls and elegant facades. But every step I took closer to the truth seemed to pull me deeper into a maze of uncertainty, fear, and something darker I couldn't yet name. It started with a phone call. My heart raced the moment I saw the unknown number. I hesitated before answering, knowing instinctively that this could change everything. The voice on the other end was calm, almost eerily so, and it spoke words that made my blood run cold. "You're closer than you should be, Alec. Keep digging, and you'll regret it." Just like that, in a few short seconds, the world I had been trying to navigate began to shift beneath my feet. Every glance, every word, every interaction suddenly felt like it had hidden layers I had never noticed. I tried to go about my days as usual, but the mansion itself began to feel like a trap. The opulence that once seemed like a dream now felt suffocating, like gilded bars surrounding me, keeping me in a cage I couldn't escape. Even he, the man I had married to escape one kind of control, seemed to be changing. There was tension in his voice, hesitation in his smile, and moments when his eyes betrayed thoughts he refused to share. I realized we were both trapped in a web far more complicated than either of us could have imagined. And every decision felt like walking on a wire stretched over an abyss. Then came the first real confrontation. It wasn't loud or explosive at first, just a small exchange that revealed the depth of hidden truths. I had discovered a document in his office, a paper that shouldn't have been there, containing information about my life details I had shared with no one, thoughts I had never spoken aloud. My stomach twisted as I realized someone had been watching me, tracking me, knowing far more than I ever imagined possible. And when he entered the room and saw the paper in my hands, I expected anger, accusation, punishment, but instead, he looked stunned, almost vulnerable. It was the first crack in his carefully maintained armor, and I could feel the tension between us shift, teetering on the edge of confrontation and revelation. The following days blurred into a series of encounters that tested every ounce of my courage. Conversations became riddles, smiles, masks, hiding unspoken threats, and every hallway, every room, every glance carried weight. I started noticing how subtle gestures could convey danger, how silence could speak louder than words, and how trust was a currency more valuable than gold and far more fragile. I realized that in this world, survival depended not only on perception but on the courage to act, even when the outcome was uncertain. Then came the night that truly changed everything. I was in the garden, the moonlight casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, when I saw him speaking to someone I didn't recognize. The figure was cloaked in darkness, their face hidden, but their presence radiated authority, danger, and intent. I froze, unable to step back, unable to run, my mind racing with every possibility. What were they planning? How much did he know? How much did I know? And when he turned toward me, locking eyes with mine, I realized that the truth was far more complex and far more dangerous than I had imagined. Over the next hours, revelations came like waves, each one hitting me harder than the last. I discovered hidden aspects of his life, secrets he had kept even from those closest to him, and a network of influences and manipulations that left me breathless with shock. I realized that the marriage I had entered to escape one kind of fate had led me into another, a world of intrigue, deception, and stakes I could barely comprehend. Every choice I had made, every word I had spoken, every step I had taken seemed to have consequences far beyond my understanding. Yet, amid the fear and uncertainty, I felt a growing resolve. I couldn't allow myself to be swept along like a leaf in a storm. I had to understand, to uncover, to navigate this treacherous terrain with all my wits and courage. Every whispered threat, every shadowy figure, every hidden document was a challenge, a test of my ability to survive in a world that had previously existed only in the imaginations of people in movies or magazines. And then, the final moment of the chapter, the moment that left me breathless and shaking, came unexpectedly. I discovered a room I had never been told existed, hidden behind a heavy, unmarked door in the west wing of the mansion. The air inside was thick with secrecy, and as I stepped inside, I realized I had stumbled upon the very heart of the hidden world he inhabited. Papers, photographs, letters, evidence of a life that was both dazzling and dangerous, a life that explained some of the inconsistencies I had noticed, but left me with more questions than answers. Standing there, surrounded by the tangible weight of secrets, I felt the gravity of my own situation like never before. This was no longer a story about escaping one fate or another. This was a story about survival, about navigating a maze of truth, deception, and human emotion that I had been thrust into without warning. And as I left that room, closing the door behind me, I realized that nothing would ever feel safe again. I had stepped too far into the shadows to ever return to the light of my old life, and every step forward carried the risk of discovery, betrayal, or danger. And yet, even in the fear, there was determination. I had survived this far. I had uncovered pieces of the puzzle, and though the full picture remained hidden, I knew I had the strength to face it. Each day brought new challenges, new revelations, and new dangers, but also the chance to learn, to understand, and to claim a measure of control in a world that seemed intent on keeping me powerless. I knew then, more clearly than ever, that the journey I had begun was far from over. The stakes were higher, the threats more real, and the secrets more dangerous than I had imagined. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't turn back. I couldn't pretend this hadn't happened. I had to face it, confront it, and somehow survive it, because if I didn't, there was no telling what the consequences would be, or who would suffer along the way. I can still feel that night in my bones, as if it branded itself into my very skin. It began with a silence so heavy it felt alive, pressing down on the walls of the mansion, making every breath sharp and uneasy. I had grown used to shadows by then, two secrets lurking behind locked doors and whispered words. But this was different. This was the moment everything collided, the moment I could no longer hide from the truth. I had returned to that hidden room, the one I wasn't supposed to know existed. My heart hammered in my chest as I sifted through papers, photographs, files, evidence of things I didn't even want to believe were real. Transactions, names, places, some of them connected to me in ways I couldn't understand, others tied to people I knew from the life I had left behind. My hands trembled as I held a photo of myself taken from a distance, candid, long before I ever stepped into this house. My blood froze. They had been watching me for years. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow, steady, getting closer. I shoved the papers back, but it was too late. The door creaked open, and there he stood, my husband. His face was calm, but his eyes, they burned with a fire I had never seen before. "What are you doing in here, Alec?" His voice was quiet, almost too quiet. I tried to answer, but the words tangled in my throat. For the first time, I saw him without the mask, the charming smile, the calm confidence, the protective presence all stripped away, leaving a man I didn't recognize. There was power in him, yes, but also menace. A man who had been living a double life, one I had stumbled into without ever realizing how deep it ran. "I trusted you," I whispered, my voice breaking, "but you've been lying to me from the very beginning." His silence was worse than any denial. He didn't even try to excuse it. Instead, he stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the room until it swallowed me whole. My chest tightened as he reached out and took the photograph from my hand, tearing it in two with a cold finality that made me shiver. "You weren't supposed to find this," he said, almost to himself. "Not yet, not yet." Those two words hit me harder than anything else. Not yet. Which meant he had always intended for me to know. Someday, but on his terms, not mine. My stomach twisted as I realized just how trapped I truly was. That's when everything spiraled. He revealed pieces of the truth I could hardly process: how my life had intersected with his long before we met. How my escape from one world had been carefully orchestrated to lead me straight into his. Nothing had been an accident. Not the chance meeting, not the marriage, not even the so-called safety he provided. I wasn't just his wife. I was part of something much bigger, something I had never agreed to. And then came the part that shattered me. He confessed his family, his business, his wealth. They weren't what they seemed. Behind the elegance and charm was a world of power built on manipulation, fear, and control. A world I had unknowingly stepped into the moment I said yes. I remember the way my hands shook, my knees weakening beneath me, as his words poured out. It felt like my entire life was collapsing in on itself. The walls seemed to close in, my breath shallow, my body trembling as though I were standing on the edge of a cliff with nothing but darkness below. I wanted to run, to scream, to tear free of the invisible chains tightening around me, but my feet wouldn't move. My heart was pounding so violently I thought it might burst. And then his hand, reaching for me, not with tenderness, but with a force that made it clear I belonged here, whether I wanted to or not. In that moment, I saw my life split in two. One path led to silence, acceptance, obedience, survival at the cost of my soul. The other led to resistance, danger, and possibly death. There was no middle ground. My voice cracked as I whispered, "I won't be a part of this." His eyes hardened, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw the truth. I was no longer his partner, no longer his escape. I was his prisoner. The air between us grew electric, the silence so thick it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. My chest heaved as tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. And then, just as he stepped closer, just as the weight of his world pressed down on me, just as I thought there was no escape, something happened. A sound from the hallway, a knock at the door. It was enough to freeze us both in place. He turned, his expression flashing with something I had never seen before. For the first time, he was afraid. and in that single heartbeat, I realized I wasn't the only one in danger. He was, too. The truth wasn't just between us. It was bigger, darker, and it was coming for us both. The knock on the door changed everything. It wasn't just a sound, it was a break in the storm, a shift in the air so sharp it made my skin prickle. My husband froze mid-step, his hand still half reaching for me, his eyes flicking toward the hallway with a flash of something I had never thought I'd see in him. Fear, in the man who had always seemed untouchable. For a moment, I forgot my own terror as I watched him tense, his jaw tight, his body rigid. Whoever was on the other side of that door wasn't just an intruder, was someone who had power over him. And if they had power over him, then maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. He motioned for me to stay silent, his finger to his lips, but I couldn't control the shaking in my body. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was certain whoever stood in the hallway could hear it too. The knock came again, this time harder, more insistent, like it carried the weight of something inevitable. And then came the voice, calm, clear, cold. "We know she's in there." I felt my stomach drop, my knees almost buckled. They weren't here for him, they were here for me. He stiffened, his eyes darting toward me, and in that instant, I saw the truth. He had been keeping me hidden, not out of love, not out of protection, but because I was part of a game he couldn't afford to lose. I wasn't his partner, I was his leverage. The door creaked open slowly. Shadows spilled into the room, tall and unshakable, and in stepped two men I had never seen before, dressed in dark suits, their faces unreadable. They carried an energy that was heavier than the silence in that room. My husband tried to speak, to command control the way he always did, but one of the men raised a hand, and he fell silent, like even he knew this was a battle he couldn't win. "You kept her too long," the man said simply. "Now it's time." I couldn't breathe. My voice was caught between a scream and a sob, my body trembling so violently it felt like I would shatter into pieces. I wanted to ask what they meant, why they were here, why my life had been twisted into this nightmare, but the answers didn't matter anymore. The truth was here, standing in front of me, and it was darker than anything I had ever imagined. My husband turned to me, his eyes wild, desperate, as though pleading with me to understand something without words. But how could I trust a man who had trapped me in his world of lies? The men didn't shout, they didn't threaten, they simply stepped closer, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't the only victim here. My husband's empire, his secrets, his power, they were nothing compared to what stood before us now. And in that terrifying clarity, I understood something that broke me to my core. I had never been free. Not when I escaped my past. Not when I married him. Not even when I thought I was strong enough to face the truth. I had always been a piece on someone else's board, moved and controlled by hands I never saw coming. My husband tried to shield me, stepping in front of me, but one of the men spoke again, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. "This isn't about you anymore. It never was. She was chosen long before you." Those words will haunt me forever. Chosen. For what? By whom? Why me? I never got the full answer. Maybe I never will. But what I do know is this. That night marked the end of the life I thought I knew. The girl who once believed in freedom, in love, in safety, she didn't survive. In her place stood someone else. Someone who carried scars deeper than skin. Someone who could never look at the world the same way again. I survived that night, somehow. But survival isn't the same as living. Every day since I wake with questions that claw at my mind. Was I saved, or was I spared for something worse? Was my story mine at all, or was it written long before I was even born? And the cruelest question of all, the one that gnaws at me when the nights are quiet and the shadows feel too close, how many more lives are trapped just like mine, thinking they are free, when in truth, they're nothing more than pawns in someone else's game. This is my story. But it isn't just mine. It's a warning, a wound, a whisper in the dark for anyone who dares to believe they're safe. Because if it could happen to me, it could happen to you.